Since 2011, Mohnish Pabrai, accomplished investor, philanthropist, author and entrepreneur, has been coming to MDI to share his accumulated wisdom with your seniors. Today he will be addressing all of you. I hope you read the reading material on Mohnish which I sent to you earlier. As you know, one of the most dazzling accomplishments of Mohnish is the Dakshina Foundation, which has a fantastic track record. And I sent you some material on that. It's absolutely astonishing. During its 8 full years of operation, IITs have accepted 888 Dakshina scholars out of a total universe of 1715. That's a hit rate of 52%. Most of you, I recall, are engineers, so you know just how astonishing this track record is. After all, IITs, they have an acceptance ratio of just about 2%. Last year, Mohnish got along with him a few Dakshina scholars. They were sitting over there at the end of the room, and their presence absolutely electrified the audience because they spoke about their journey through Dakshina and through IIT. And how their own lives and the lives of their family have been transformed thanks to the Dakshina Foundation. Most of these scholars, I can guarantee, wouldn't have finished even high school but for Dakshina's help. Like everything else in life, Mohnish explained how he approached Dakshina Foundation as an investor, one who wants to get the best bang for his buck, where the bang for the buck in the context of the Dakshina means the social impact of the investment. And I think that's one of the most remarkable talks that I've ever hosted in this room. We also have with us Srini Pulavarti, who will also speak to you. He is CIO of a very famous endowment of UCLA. I'm sure you all heard about UCLA. Srini is the CIO and president of that foundation, so he manages their money. Both of them will speak to you about our topic, which I haven't told you, so we want to keep the suspense. They're going to talk to you about bubbles. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mohnish.
It's always a pleasure to be here, and I think that there are very few places on the planet, as far as graduate MBA programs go, which actually have focused on value investing, and it is quite a blessing for MDI and India to have such a place, and I think the credit goes to Sanjay. So, round of applause to him. Not even fill up the 5 fingers of one hand in terms of the number of schools that focus on this area. So when professors decide to focus on what they will specialize in, they generally want to focus on things where they attract sponsors and they attract a lot of money and grants and consulting and so on. And that doesn't happen with value investing. So then there are no natural sponsors, which is why you don't have that much in academia. It's the same reason why entrepreneurship also doesn't get taught much in MBA programs. So the few places that do have it, and what Sanjay's put together is quite unique. And so it's always a pleasure to be here. And I think the quality of the students is world class. I think I get some of the best questions for most students versus anywhere else. So it's a great asset. It's wonderful to have that here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about bubbles, and let's see if we can make this work. All right. So history doesn't repeat itself, but it does rhyme. So sometimes it's kind of good to go through some history. And in the 1920s, actually 1922, is when there was a big bubble that burst, which was the motors bubble. So at that time, in 1921-22, we had hundreds and hundreds of car companies, and basically, if you looked at the United States at that time, so you would see, like, you know, the trend in terms of the number of cars being sold. It was the emerging market. I mean, basically the whole country was going through industrialization, the highways were going to get built out, the population is growing pretty rapidly. And you can see, like, 1990 we had 1.3 million cars, and especially from 21 to 22, you see that 50% jump from 1.7 to 2.5 million. Even China in this day and age has not seen those types of jumps in autos and such. So it was very significant in terms of the growth. So the growth was very much real. And basically, investors basically had a certain perspective, right? So they felt that autos were going to grow. Obviously, the country was going to grow, the population was going to grow up. The country was going to industrialize on all fronts. Investors were absolutely right. And what ended up happening is that nearly all the 1921 investors in the industry lost their entire investment. So even though they were right on all the macro trends, you still couldn't make money. It was a difficult time to make money, even though every part of their forecast was correct. And you know, this is a listing of, it's not a complete list, a partial list of some of the companies that, so there were literally hundreds of auto companies at the time. And they basically, so you see the name and you see the start and end date when they existed over the years, and you can just see that they pretty much, you know, most of them just disappeared, and we haven't even heard of them over that period. And then, you know, about 38 years after that bubble burst, there was another bubble, which is the electronics bubble. And at that time, basically the expectation was that that electronics and semiconductors and all the miniaturization of stuff that was going to happen was going to be huge. And people were correct. They were absolutely correct. All the investors were right that it was going to be transformational. You know, Moore's law, the transistor, all the silicon on chips, and the rapid you know, growth in brain power on silicon. I mean, everything played out. In fact, from 59 to 2015, it's still playing out. You know, and that's like a 55-year run, 56-year run. But even then, what ended up happening is the 1959 investors in these Tronics type companies lost their entire investment. And if you look at kind of some of these names, so what people did is they floated companies which either ended with the term Tron at the end or Onyx at the end. You know, so you had like Astron, Dutron, Vulcatron, and then, you know, Circuitronics, Supertronics, and the one with both, you know, Powertron, Ultrasonics. You know, how could you lose with Powertron, Ultrasonics? You know? And of course, it didn't go so well, and we ended up with complete losses. And then, you know, about 40 years after that, we had the .com bubble, and since it's been about 15 years, I think many of you wouldn't have been, you know, adults and such. Probably maybe teenagers when you were less than teenagers, when you were 12, 13 years old or so, or 10 years old. And but Srini and I are old enough to remember this, and it's good, and Sanjay lives with it, of course. So this is one we won't forget for a while. So basically, when we had the .com bubble, you know, the internet was going to be a game changer. It has been a game changer. Radically changed people's lives. Still continue to do that. So that's absolutely correct. And it would reconfigure the economy. These were things that people believed the internet would do, and it has done all those things. And again, almost all of the 1999 investors in .coms lost their entire investment. Bad place to invest money. In fact, and you end up with some not so good results, even though you had all the factors, macro factors behind you. And you know, so some of these companies, Boo.com, you know, Webvan, and so on. We had all these different companies that came on board at that time, and we had some pretty spectacular valuations. So, like for example, you look at some of the deals that were done at the time. Yeah, so you see some of these deals. You know, some of the interesting ones are, you know, you see all these issues going on with Yahoo right now. You know, they bought Broadcast.com for $5.7 billion, and most of you probably never heard of Broadcast.com, but you might have heard of Mark Cuban. How many of you heard of Mark Cuban? Yeah, see, some people have heard of Mark Cuban. That's pretty good. So Mark Cuban sold Broadcast.com to Yahoo, and the only smart thing he did after the sale, and he insisted on doing this after the sale, was being allowed to hedge 100% of Yahoo stock, because all these deals happened in Chinese money, you know. And so when he got Yahoo stock, also known as Chinese money, he hedged the entire position. And the funny thing is, so his net worth was about $5 billion. It was completely hedged, and his net worth now is I think $2.3 billion. So somehow in the last 15 years with all his adventures, he didn't add to his net worth, but you know, that one decision probably saved him a few $1 billion, got him a private jet, got him the Dallas Mavericks, and got him a spot on that Shark Tank. How many of you watch Shark Tank? The Shark Tank show up here? Pardon? Indian version आया Shark Tank का? तो शुरू कर दो. You know, there's a offering there. So anytime you're an entrepreneur, you look for offering there. So there's no Indian version of Shark Tank. They should be, right? So you had all these, you know, crazy things going on. You know, Ask.com got bought by ISE Interactive for $1.9 billion. I don't even know what ISE Interactive's current market cap is, but that's a huge portion that they paid at that time for this. And so you had some pretty crazy behavior. And so, you know, if you look at these three bubbles, the interesting thing is they're all about 38 to 40 years apart. And they're very similar to each other, you know. And so those two things are not coincidences. So the reason why these bubbles are that far apart is because like Sanjay and I, or Srini and I, we know what happened during the .com era. And so if there's another bubble like that, we would, you know, pound the table and say, hey guys, go to, you know, we've seen this movie before. In fact, I remember that in early 2000, I think January 2000, I was living in Chicago, and I got in this cab, and most of the cab drivers is a Sikh or Pakistani. So this Pakistani cab driver from Lahore, he says to me, आपका Cisco के बारे में क्या ख्याल है? Okay, and so he didn't know I'm an engineer and I would actually know something about Cisco. So I said, आपने Cisco में invest की? हाँ, हमने लगाया Cisco में. हमने, you know, he named off all these Yahoo and all these things. That he said, you know, ये सब लगा दिया, you know, it's going up and everything. And that's when you knew, like the, you know, 1929, the shoe shine boy in Wall Street giving you stock tips. You pretty much knew there was a cab driver in from Lahore in Chicago was buying Cisco, and you know, saying that's the one you should buy. That, you know, you were hitting a top. And so the reason that these things take about this much time to happen is because the set of investors who saw it need to have left the scene. So if you think of human lifetimes and such, so if we looked at the dot-com bubble happening in 2000, and let's say the next bubble was coming in 2040, so a person who was 30 years old, for example, at 2000 would be about 70. And whatever is the cause of the 2040 bubble, maybe, transport to Mars, we don't know. They're not in the picture. And so that the participants, in fact, Buffett raised the issue with the motors bubble during the dot-com bubble. And I think Business Week ran a cover which says, "What's wrong?" No, I think it was Aaron's, "What's wrong, Warren?" In '99. That was their response when Warren Buffett tried to tell them about the motors bubble. But he was seeing the parallels, but the world was not really listening. So bubbles need that kind of 40-year period for the same type of thing. But the thing is, bubbles are very common. They actually happen all the time. And almost all the time, more than one bubble is building up. It would actually surprise you how common the bubbles are. Then we have a different sort of bubble which took place just about 40 years ago. In the late 60s, early 70s, there was this concept. You're the concept of Nifty 50, and in India, it's not the same Nifty 50. This is your grandmother's Nifty 50. So in late 60s, early 70s, the idea was that you could buy these very high quality blue chip names, and the price didn't matter. So basically, the idea was you buy these companies and you hold them because they were so good and they were so entrenched in their positions that the price didn't matter. So you have things like, so if you think about 1971 and you think about a company like McDonald's and you look at it 45 years after, that's absolutely true. McDonald's has dramatically increased the size of its moat, the size of its sales, products, all these offerings over that period. When McDonald's was trading at close to 90 time earnings, you had Disney at 80 times earnings, you had Coke at massive. These P's were just huge, 70, 80, 90, 100 times earnings. The idea was, and since everyone was being given this advice, so you basically had a bipolar market. You had the Nifty 50 trading at very high valuations, and then everything else trading at, who cares? And then we had basically we had a crash in slow motion, but it was a very severe crash. So in 1973 and 74, we had a very significant downdraft in US stocks, but it wasn't like 1929 where you had one day, or 1987 where you had one day, or you didn't have a single day event. You had a kind of over a 2-year period, something like 40-50% of market value was gone. And so when you looked at the price drop from the peak of 72 to the bottom of 74, and of course what happened in the US in 73 and 74 was that it was all gloom and doom. So for the first time we had the impeachment and the resignation of a US president. For the first time you had the oil embargo. For the first time in the US, Americans had to queue up, miles-long lines near gas stations, and they couldn't get gas. Kind of what you just saw in Nepal recently. And you had a president who, on all his wisdom, imposed price controls. So you had this whole bunch of kind of ugly stuff, the Arab oil embargo, price control, all these things coming together, and basically. So what happened is that when the market started to crater in 73, the Nifty 50 stayed intact. But then they were taken out back one by one and shot. And by the time we ended in the end of 74, you had a bloodbath. And that took place about what 30, what's 23, 38, about 38 years ago, 37, 38 years ago. And so if you look at the situation today, we have some behavior and some things going on, at least in US markets, which are similar to the Nifty 50 in 73, 74. It's not the same because it's never the same, right? But it's similar. So we have these companies which are very high quality companies, incredible companies, just like McDonald's and Coke and such. But they have ridiculous valuations, right? So Amazon is at 600 times earnings, and Netflix is at 240 times earnings. And the Netflix CEO, when he's asked about the stock price, he says it's a mystery to me. Explain the market cap. And if SolarCity and Tesla made money, they would be at some ridiculous valuation. I think Facebook has 95 times earnings. Who knows what Uber's market cap will be when it goes public. And you have some of that going on in India as well, where you have the Flipkarts and the cousins of some of these companies, if you will. Again, you have the same frenzy going on where people are trying to invest in the equivalents in the Indian space as well. And so if you look at a company like Tesla, for example, they have about $4 billion in revenue. They're losing about $400 million a year. There's a $30+ billion market cap. And even if they made money, even if they had an 8% margin, which would be the best of BMW type margins, even then you get over 100 times earnings on that, and they're nowhere near those margins and such. And no idea when they'll make money. And if you look at, for example, a company like General Motors. Okay, so look at GM, for example. So people say that Tesla is the future, right? Because it's got electric cars and all those things. So GM has a all-electric. They already have electric cars on the road, but they have an all-electric 200-mile range car coming out next year, 2 years ahead of Tesla for $30,000. So there's nothing kind of spectacular about electrification that gives Tesla any kind of edge. But if you look at something like General Motors, you back out some of their cash and such, it's actually cheaper than Tesla. One is doing $4 billion in revenue, the other is doing $150 billion in revenue. And GM's cash flows are on their way to $10 billion and probably on the way to $13 or $14 billion. And if you look at a company like GM, they have two businesses. So one is their auto finance business, which is not even heavy capex or anything. It's a captive bank, if you will. That business makes $1 billion a year, going to $2 billion a year. So if you take a business like that, probably go $30 billion at some point. And then they have the China business, which makes $2 billion a year. So you're the largest auto market with the number one market share. And so if you just took those two businesses of GM and took out everything else, it would still exceed what the business should be worth. So you have, but the thing is, GM is not sexy, and Tesla is sexy. So you have these distortions that happen because of that. And I took this quote from David Heinon's letter recently without asking David, so I hope he doesn't mind. But he talked about, like, they own Micron Technology, which is now got an oligopoly position in DRAMs. There are only 3 suppliers in the world, and Micron is number 2 after Samsung. And so Micron basically makes close to $4 billion in pre-tax earnings, and actually after-tax earnings, and then Netflix is making $240 million. And of course, Netflix, actually the market cap is over $50 billion now. And Micron keeps dropping, I think they're like 13, 14 billion now. It's gone the other way. So you have this kind of huge variance in the two. And Netflix, do we have Netflix in India yet? Is it in the cards to come, or we will not? Pardon? Next list now. And is there an equivalent Indian player? Another offering. So the thing about Netflix is it's a pipe, right? I mean, the content they make internally is irrelevant. It's really the pipe. But the thing is that when they feed content to the pipe, they have to pay license fees. And so, like I have Netflix at home. Srini, you have Netflix. $9.99 all you can eat.
Yes.
Yeah. So $10 a month, all you can eat, and any movies that you want to watch. But each time we're watching the movies, there are royalty payments that need to be made to the content owner. And so when you look at Netflix, and so even if you assume that the distribution pipes are free, you still have to pay for the content. And so it's not clear. I mean, Netflix is a fantastic business run by a great CEO, great team. Everything is fantastic. But it's not clear what are the long-term economics of the business. Right? I mean, when they finally get built out, what portion of the $10 goes to content providers versus the pipe? And we had this battle play out in the cable business in the US, and the content guys have a lot of clout. So it's what I would say is that at best it's murky. It's not obvious that certain things will go certain ways. But markets have a kind of different way of looking at things. And then this is a chart which shows like the number of companies trading at any given time in the US with a PE over 100. So in the .com era we had like 120 companies with a PE over 100. And the only other time we've come close is right now where we're about 80 companies. So you're seeing this polarization in the market, just like you saw in the Nifty 50 at that time. And of course, what we saw in 2000 was the day the Nasdaq peaked over 5,000 was the same day that Berkshire hit a multi-year low. I mean, both events happened exactly the same time. You could literally see the money getting pulled out of Berkshire and those people taking that and buying out. There was a kind of activity taking place there. And in fact, even when Pabrai Fund we launched in July '99, in the frenzy of the internet bubble, actually worked out really well. The first year, I think we were up 70% because we sidestepped all the .com stuff, and all the non-.com stuff was really cheap. So things worked out just fine. And in fact, the next few years, the bubble kept popping. We did very well as a result. And so if you look at the US Nasdaq, there's 2,200 stocks. Combined have a value of 7 trillion. Used to have a value of 2 trillion in 2002 and 2009. And then the top 10 names are 2 trillion. So you're something like 30% of the value out of 2,200 companies in the top 10 names, and the top 100 names are like 70+% of value. So a huge portion is sitting in those Netflix type names. And so these things are kind of hard to forecast. It's hard to see kind of what events play out, which causes any of this to change. Does it flatline? Does it drop a lot? These are kind of things that are hard to forecast. But the simple thing I think may make sense is to avoid the sector. Because you don't need to have exposure to all sectors, or some sectors kind of just go crazy. You can just do other things. And while you do other things, you might look stupid in the short term. But that's what Sanjay teaches you, to look stupid in the short term. Isn't that right, Sanjay? Okay, yeah, so it's good to look stupid in the short term. And then, if you look at what we're seeing happen right now, is I think what we are seeing is we are seeing these companies kind of get to euphoric valuations, and then they are in effect basically being taken out back in short. So in 73, 74, what popped the Nifty 50 was macro events, which were unrelated to the Nifty 50. What we're seeing now is the markets are, so at one point, GoPro, how many of you are familiar with GoPro? Oh, there's a lot of, is it sold in India? Popular? Not popular, hasn't taken off. Expensive. How much is it? Okay. 455, that's right. So if you're familiar with GoPro, like I have one on my bicycle, so this is great for videos. It's a camera. It's a camera with a waterproof case, which to me doesn't sound, and it has some software. None of those pieces, I believe, are rocket science. But the market at one point put a 9 billion value on that camera with a waterproof case, and it has since taken that valuation down. We don't know where it's going from here. But so it may be that this bubble pops one company at a time, as some. Now GoPro is a little bit easier to see. Netflix may be harder. So we have to see how that plays out, and just kind of watch what happens there. So we've seen some of this happening already. Like we've seen Twitter, basically 48 billion of value is gone. Living Social, company was going to go public. It's laying off people, from 4,500 to 800 people. A lot of these companies are now IPOing below the last venture round, even the last couple of venture rounds. So they're going out below what the. And one of the things that I think happens is that when companies get venture capital, the venture capitalists are getting participating preferreds and such, so they are pretty much almost guaranteed to get their money back before the founders and such see much in terms of cash. So that's the way that. So nobody cares if you're investing in Twitter, not Twitter, but let's say investing in Uber, even at 100 billion valuation. Because if the valuation comes in eventually at 20 billion, then the investors need to be paid off first, all those venture investors. So they're not really going to lose, which is why they're willing to kind of get these things up to crazy numbers. But they're not going to make money. They're just kind of get their money back at best. And so now we have all these unicorns, which is companies over $1 billion valuation that are still private, and there's 141 of them with a combined value over 500 billion. And so the bubble is not just in the public equities. In my opinion, it's on both sides, the public and private. And we'll have to see, because again, like 73, 74, these are real companies, and they are world-class companies. I would say Amazon is absolutely world-class in how they operate. Netflix is world-class. So they are real businesses, real companies, real customers doing a great job, but valuations still matter. And I think that with that we'll have Srini come in, and then after Srini gives you his perspective on bubbles. One thing I would just say is that there's a book. There's a few books on bubbles. There's one book called Trend Watching, which was written by a former TV news anchor. I don't have too much confidence in books by TV news anchor, but it's called Trend Watching by Ron and Sana. And if you read Trend Watching, it will show you that there's almost all the time there are bubbles going on around us. It's a nature. As long as humans are involved in markets, we will have bubbles, because it's just the nature of the beast. And I think it's actually quite a treat to have Srini here. recently Srini had dinner with Charlie, I think a few months back, Charlie Munger, and then I think the next day Charlie Munger was at the Daily Journal annual meeting, and he brought up the dinner with Srini. He said that Munger and Munger are really good at reading people, and he said that was what he thought that this Indian money manager had his head screwed on right, and also that the way Srini has approached allocating the $2 billion plus of capital to UCLA is probably a model for a lot of endowments to follow. So, Srini.
So I can. Hello, good afternoon. It's a very tough act to follow people like Mohnish, but I will try to give you a perspective from an asset allocator. So very briefly, in the US we have this phenomenon where students like you become very successful, leave and build big companies and give a lot of money back to their schools. And I hope that you'll all do that to MDI. And next time when I come, I hope there is a $100 million endowment here. It will happen, don't laugh at this. This is a very unique phenomenon, unique to US, but I think it's a very important phenomenon. Right? It's all about branding. Right? You want to brand MDI. Right? People at UCLA, at Harvard, UCLA, Princeton, Columbia, students have given money that amounts in billions of dollars. Why do kids give money? It is part of branding. Right? The universities in the US are very good at branding. Schools are very good at branding. I am a 12-year-old boy. Mohnish has 2 girls. So from the time he was 5 years old, he used to come back with the flag of his team. Right? So they inculcate this sense of pride of the institution, of their home team, the school team, the city, it doesn't matter, professional, college. So, the one thing that I wish that institutions here do a better job is branding and try to keep the kids after they leave, the school students leave, engaged. Because the engagement is what returns to school, and that's how you create endowments foundations. Okay, so bubbles. So I heard that Mohnish mentioned to me that he's going to talk about bubbles. So I lecture at UCLA frequently at the Anderson Business School, and one of the topics I cover is behavioral finance. And so part of that course, I cover some aspect of bubbles. Right? So here, I'm not going to go through every bubble, but as Mohnish said earlier, the world is not new to bubbles. Human behavior is a primary reason. Policy by government officials is another reason. Innovation is another reason. So my job as an asset allocator is to try to understand what may cause bubbles, and if we can get that right, because our job, ultimate goal is to make money. And so to get insight into why we create bubbles, why bubbles inflate, and what causes the bubbles to deflate. Many of those things are very common sense questions. Right? And many of the answers to these are also very common sense driven questions. But you can never underestimate human stupidity. Right? Why is GoPro, as Mohnish said, it's a camera. And my son has one. Right? It is $400. And he, I think, blew the camera out the second time he went underwater. And he wanted to go scuba diving and he took it underwater. And he's 12 years old. He didn't put the seal properly. Who knows? But why should it cost $9 billion? Right? It defies common sense. And so these bubbles are all around us. And most of them are, one bubble bursts and then it creates the pathway to the next bubble. Right? And so there is always a continuum in how and as I tell my team and my students is that there are 2 aspects to creating the bubble. One is the creating the bubble and the other is the busting of the bubble. Right? So we are worried about both, but busting is not the problem. Right? What causes the bubble is the problem. Right? And so we spend an inordinate amount of time trying to understand. So I thought that I will take you through one recent bubble that we all are part of. Right? And it is right in front of us, but sometimes there is not much you can do. Right? So if you are an economist, I worked as an economist for 5 years before I got into money management. Right? The University of Chicago has a very simple identity. It's called the Chicago identity. Milton Friedman came up with this. And the identity is, if you multiply, do you have a chalk? You have a, right. So it's the product of money supply times velocity of money should approximate what?
P into Y. P into Y.
Growth. So what does the Federal Reserve do in the US? Right, after the global financial crisis, they inject a lot of liquidity. So we put around 4 trillion into the market. Right? So the idea was the economy had slowed down. We were in a crisis mode. We lost 2 of our biggest banks, Lehman and Bear Stearns. So clearly the world was on fire. So the Federal Reserve, how many of you know the history of Federal Reserve? So Federal Reserve was created in 1913. We had a panic in 1907. So when the panic of 1907, so I think Mohnish showed you a slide where the first bubble was 1921. So between 1893 and 1907, the US markets were on fire. We had many financial crises. The big one was in 1907. And then in 1907, the Knickerbocker scandal, the United Copper Company scandal, created a committee. The result of that, they created a committee, and their job was to come up with the idea of central bank. Most other European countries already had a central bank. US was the last one to come up with the idea of central bank in the developed countries. So it took them 6 years of haggling, and Woodrow Wilson signed the Federal Reserve Act in 1930. So their job was to bring stability. So in the last 100 years, we had many crises, but 2008 was a big one. Right? After 29, we had a big. This was the next big one. So what do? They inject liquidity. Right? So what happens? Right? So they injected liquidity, and in the history, this goes back to 1955. So in the last 50 odd years, we have never had the cost of capital as low for as long as we have had. Cost of money in the US is zero, right? Until last week, small, marginal 25%. And so all that money that came into the system, and with the cost of capital being as low as it is, this is the same chart showing you how the money supply increased in the US. I don't need to explain to you this graph. But then what happened to the velocity of money? So velocity of money crashed. So this equation was no longer valid. The Fed can only control the front end of the curve. So they injected the liquidity. So if the velocity of money stayed constant, then you would have seen growth. But the velocity of money crashed. So we didn't have the growth that the Federal Reserve thought that they can influence. And so the only tool they had at that time was put into play, but it is not good. So this is a very powerful graph. Right? How many of you know Tom Piketty? Yeah. Right? So if you read Tom Piketty's book, he covers this concept of inequality, right? Wealth inequality, income inequality, quite vividly. Right? So this graph is the perfect example to explain the idea of inequality. Because when the velocity of money drops, what it is suggesting is the amount of money in circulation is reducing. Why is it reducing when there was so much liquidity injected into the system? all that money went to the top 5% of people. So it didn't go to the people it was meant to go to, but it went to the top 5%. What does that mean? What it means is, who has the money? The rich people. Who have the assets? The rich people. So when rich people get more money, what happens? They buy more assets. Then you create an asset bubble. And so what are the assets that you can inflate? Stocks and real estate. What got inflated in the US? Stocks and real estate. So this is how bubbles are formed. So who instigated this bubble? The Federal Reserve. So I have this lecture that I give on institutions, inclusive institutions and extractive institutions. If you read this book called Why Nations Fail, two MIT economists, Hashemoglu and Robinson, wrote this book. And so what do they talk about? They talk about institutions that can be deemed inclusive or extractive. So in this, and it is an extremely, profoundly difficult answer to answer that question, whether an institution is inclusive or extractive. The Federal Reserve was meant to be an inclusive institution, but over the last 7 years, we can argue that it behaved like an extractive institution. What is the difference? Inclusive institutions are institutions that are meant to benefit society at large. Extractive institutions are those that extract value out of society, like North Korea. And so in this case, by the Federal Reserve keeping the cost of capital as low as it has kept, it benefited very few people at the expense of all the others. Right? And so I just wanted to give you a sense of how policy developments, policy moves by large institutions can create bubbles and how it can impact society. And so, as an economist, all of you are very familiar with distortions. Cost of capital at zero is a distortion. Right? And this is the chart that shows you European countries issuing debt at negative interest rates. It defies common sense. Why would Germany raise a $5 billion bond and ask you to pay them money to keep that money? But this is another sign. These are all signals. Right? So, what is happening to countries where you have negative interest rates, where you have debt to GDP, in the red boxes. So cheap money has a way to distort almost all aspects of capital markets. And I'll come back to this. And so the debt to GDP is at the highest level in the US. Right? And the shaded part is the recessions that we experience in the US. So the question now to most US investors is, we have had the US stock market deliver at 20% annualized over the last 6 years. And part of that is the asset bubble being inflated, in this case the stock market. So the question is whether there is a disconnect between what is happening in the equity market and in the real economy. So these are so the next few slides are just trying to delve down to one sector, what is happening in the energy sector. So the energy sector, this is I'm sure all of you are familiar that with the fact that the price of oil is now at its lowest in probably 15 years. And if you look at the oil production, it is at an all-time high. So this is a commodity that the whole world uses. right? The demand for the commodity has not really slacked it down, but the price has tanked. So it's, I'll go through the next few slides very quickly so that you extend. These are the examples of the deflating of a bubble. Right? So in this case, it is the some oil rigs. So you look at the rig count, it is just collapsed. It is directly related to price of oil. It is not economical in the US to drill for oil at these rates. And so this is natural gas. Yesterday I had dinner with a gentleman who was invested in energy in India, and so he was promised $9 for the natural gas, for 1 BTU of natural gas, but then Modi changed his, reneged on his promise, and now he wants to pay the $4.50. But the import price that they are paying is $9. So this consortium is asking them to pay at least the import price. For political reasons, they don't want to. So these guys stop drilling. So the implications of what is happening and all the rigs are out staying idle. Because they are saying that you would rather lose than go and pump if you are receiving half of the cost. Yes. So bubbles are inevitable. And we can't solve these bubbles with more debt. So in the US, so if you are a value investor, I was always taught that you should always try to buy $1 for 50 cents. If you can buy an asset for 50 cents and you hold it for 5 years, and if you annualize it at 15%, you double your money. And so for the first time in the last 7 years, we are seeing a dislocation in the debt market in the US. We can now buy certain assets at 60 cents, maybe 50 cents if we are really careful, and if we wait and are not worried about putting massive positions on. So the debt bubble that I showed you is at the cusp. We don't know whether it is going to be sustained, but in all likelihood, we will have our opportunities to buy assets at 50 cents. I went through the slide very quickly because I want you to have a chance to ask questions of Mohnish, because you don't get to see him more often than his annual trip here. But if you have any questions on what an asset allocator does, what a CIO does, how we come up with strategy, I can answer any questions you have. With that, Mohnish? Yeah, you have a question?
In terms of social impact, which asset class do you think has the potential to offer maximum return? The tools of investment can be money, time, energy, anything.
From a social impact, what? Okay, so it's a very complicated question, but I'll try. Mohnish and I know two gentlemen, Nicholas Sleep and Kai Zakaria, and they used to run several billion, maybe 3 to 4 billion, and they had a third of their allocation to one stock, and that stock was Amazon, and they had it for 15 years. And I'm a value investor. I never understood how somebody could put $1.5 billion in Amazon. Not today, going back 10 years ago. So I spent a lot of time just studying. Like Mohnish, I believe in a one-man investment management team. So I make all the decisions and I spend a lot of time just thinking. So if you came to my house 10 years ago and told me that I would give my credit card information and I would buy stuff on internet, I would laugh you out. Because I wouldn't do that at that time. But today, if you came to our house, 95% of everything we buy is on Amazon. We have Amazon Prime, everything is delivered. We rarely ever go shopping. We just don't. So why is, I heard this morning before we came here, several of you were in the room and we were discussing Flipkart and Amazon. So it took me a long time to get around to understand why two value investors that Mohnish knows I know, who are very Buffett-like in their investment approach, and their other holdings are very Buffett-like, like Costco and names that you and I will identify. Why Amazon? So I used to go to London just to see them and spend a lot of time thinking and asking about why they hold Amazon. It is a very risky decision to put 35% of your money in one stock anyway. Like Mohnish says that you are pregnant with that stock. And you are terribly pregnant with that stock. And so then, they changed my mind. And lesson I learned from understanding why investors invest in Amazon. Or I know Flipkart, I know Tiger, I know Chase Goldman very well, the whole Tiger family. So the value in Amazon, I'll come to your question, I'm just trying to put the context in order. So Amazon or Netflix or any of these companies, right, are companies that can change behavior and change behavior across billions of people. How do you assign value to a company's ability to change mass behavior? So what Flipkart is going through today here is they're trying to change mass behavior of a billion people. Can you change the behavior of a billion people without cost? Probably you can, but with cost you can change it probably faster. So Amazon, I don't have that slide here. I have a slide that shows you just companies like FedEx, Dell, Amazon, UPS, Microsoft, Google. What do all these companies do? They change our behavior without even realizing. I've been in the US now almost 30 years. Mohnish has been there for as long. I can tell you that when we were in the US, the way to go on vacation was sit in a car and drive for days. Nobody does it. My son would strangle me if I sat in the car for 20 minutes. People fly. Southwest Airlines just changed our behavior. Then other copycats come. JetBlue comes, right? Ryanair in Europe. I'm sure every airline in India is similar to Southwest. How many Indians now fly? It's staggering to think in 10 years they changed the way Indians behave. So the ability to change behavior is a very powerful engine, and there is value to it. And so if you look at the next 10 years, why is Netflix valued the way it is valued? Right? Why is Amazon valued the way it is valued? I think it is not because of their brick and mortar or their IP, or I think it is in their ability to change mass behavior. And I think that we have to, as a value investor, I would never buy Amazon. Right? So my job as an asset allocator, I don't have the luxury to do what Mohnish does. Right? Mohnish, if he manages money for many institutions. He probably will manage 5% of somebody's money. I manage 100% of UCLA's money. And so I have to have, by definition. So in the asset liability model, there are four basic models, right? There's insurance companies, Buffett, Mohnish has done those, and then you have pension funds. Yesterday I had at dinner Jayant Sinha, who is your Minister of Finance, and he was telling me that the return assumptions of the ETF here are 15%. I said, how are you going to get it? Right? They guarantee 8.75% to all retirees in the ETF. It's unheard of. In the US, all pension models are broken. Our PBO, pension benefit obligations, asset benefit obligations are around 8 to 9%. We can't beat them. So there's a huge mismatch between assets and liabilities. Anyway, I'll stop here with respect to Mohnish. Where did you come? Take some questions.
Let's take some more questions.
Any more? You have an answer to this question? A better one, I'm sure.
Let's take another question.
Yeah, please.
Foundation that you have. So I was a student of an organization called Super 13 Patna. You also train students for IIT. They have pretty high conversion rate. And My learning from there has changed me, and I would like to know is what's one core idea on which you train your students?
Well, first of all, if there wasn't Anand Kumar or a Super 30, there wouldn't be a Dakshina. So we have cloned that model. So thank you, Anand. Good model. But no, I don't think we're trying to do. I always tell people when people ask me about Dakshina that when they start hearing some of the reasons and way we operate, why we do things, I think their opinion of me would fall quite dramatically. So at the risk of making that fall quite dramatically, first of all, Dakshina is a clone. Right? We looked at what Anand Kumar and Super 30 was doing. It sounded quite sensible to us. It's great to see a Super 30 product in the room, so that's wonderful. And I visited Anand. Actually, I emailed him in 2006. There was an article in Business Week. I was randomly reading a Business Week article, and at that time I was trying to figure out. I knew I wanted to give our money away, but I was trying to figure out a model that would make sense. So this article in Business Week talked about Super 30. The first time I ever heard about it, and it dawned on me that it was an incredibly powerful model because if you take a population of over 1 billion and you were to, let's say, think about how many people in that population are, top 1 or 2% intelligence, with very high IQs, that number would approach infinity for all practical purposes because you're starting with such a huge population. And then what portion of those infinite number of high quality brains get wasted, that number is also infinite because almost all of it doesn't get converted. And so what Anand was doing was he was tapping into a pool of very high quality brains and harnessing the power of that brain, right, at a very low cost. And so anytime there's a United, I don't know whether they still call it that, but there's a United Negro College Fund in the US. I don't know if they still call it. Still call it that? They call it. Yeah. So the United Negro College Fund had a tagline, and the tagline was, "A mind is a terrible thing to waste." Okay. And in India, we have millions upon millions upon millions of minds that get wasted because of just the logistics and the way. Where you're born and who your parents are and all of that thing. So what Anand was doing is he was harnessing these very high IQ brains. And quite frankly, if you took an average brain and took a high IQ brain and you inject the same amount of resource on it, you're going to have a dramatically different outcome on the high IQ brain, just the way it is. So if you have a limited amount of resources, you have to make choices. And so the choice should be to put it where the return to society is the highest. So for many reasons, when I read the article, Super 30 made a lot of sense, and he was converting high potential brains into global talent at $700 a person. Right? I mean, you were in Super 30, so basically, mother was cooking for the kids. He rented fairly low-cost housing, and he taught and others taught. So the cost of the program was very very efficient to be able to do that. So I contacted Anand, got his email address, contacted him, and said I wanted to kind of help him scale and so on. And he responded saying thanks, but no thanks. So he was the only lifeline into doing something that made sense to me. Nothing else made sense to me. So I said, okay, I'm coming to Patna. So will you beat me? He said, oh yeah, you come. What year did you finish Super 30?
2006-7 batch.
Okay, so were you there when I visited? No, because I met the 2007 batch. So did you take your JE in 2007?
Yes.
So I was there. I met you guys. Chaya Boo there. I was there just before you guys took the exam, March 2007. And probably I was picture with you. but anyway, I met Anand and again talked to him in person. Again, he said he's not interested in taking outside money or taking donations. He just wanted to do his own thing the way he was doing. So I said, okay, then do you mind us stealing your model and scaling it? And he said, not only do I not mind, I will help you in any way I can, which he's always done. He's always been very in fact, he trained 7 of our Dakshina alums to become faculty who are now teaching Dakshina scholars. So it's come full circle where we had kids who were in our program, went to IIT, finished my IIT, went to Anand, and now they are some of our faculty, which is great. So the Dakshina, the idea is very simple. One is we cloned a model which I thought made sense, and it still makes sense, probably makes sense for a long time. The second is that I wanted to find a way which was efficient and high return to society in terms of recycling wealth back to society. So, you know, my dad used to say, "Nange aaye hain, nange jana hai." Right? So we're not going to take anything with us. And the second thing is that large inheritances are a disservice to your kids. So, you know, like Buffett says that, you know, if you are Jesse Owens' son, who was a sprinter, it's not going to help his Jesse Owens' son to put him on the 50-meter line in a 100-meter race when everyone else is at 0 line. He said it's okay to put him at the 10-meter, but not at the 50-meter. So you can help your kids, but if you help your kids a lot, then what's going to end up happening is they will never reach their potential, and you're actually doing a disservice to them. So if you have more assets that you're going to consume, and if those assets cannot go to your gene pool, then the choices are very limited. Right? You can basically give to society, or in Srini's case, give to UCLA, and take it from there, or MDI, right? And so I knew we wanted to recycle back. I also knew that giving money away is hard, and I wanted to do it in education in India. I also assumed that we would hit our head against a brick wall for 10 years before we were I was willing to lose everything, in the sense that whatever we were contributing to Dakshina, I was very comfortable with the outcome being a 0. So some of the principles I used for Dakshina was that didn't care about, you know, I would say, any positive or negative impact to my reputation. I didn't care about that at all. Right? I didn't care that we were a complete failure. The other thing that you have to do, I think, when you embark on a charitable endeavor, the charity is much harder than making money, I think, is swing for the fences. So, or I think in Indian lingo, just go for sixers. You know, it doesn't matter if your middle stump is gone, but go for the sixers, because the sixers are the only way to move the needle. You know, if you are going to be careful, then the moving of the needle is hard. So Dakshina is very willing to make bold bets, whether or not they work. And what has happened with us, thankfully, is that we just got a lot of tailwinds, and I don't think much of our assets have gone in a negative way. But we don't have grand plans. So our kids, the kids in the Dakshina program, we don't really spend time telling them how they should live their lives. That's really not a focus. When we first started Dakshina, we had this stupid idea that we should tell them to give 10% of their earnings back lifetime, back to society, not Dakshina, but back to society. We don't even do that right now. Now my model is the UCLA model. So the way it goes to the Harvard model, which is that we have a large number, 888, who are in IIT, but even the others have gone to NITs and other great schools. In a decade or two, we will have several Dakshina millionaires, and maybe even billionaires. So we'll just tap those guys on the shoulder in 10, 15 years. And then we can talk to them and say, hey, you want to do something. And the rest of them we don't need to bother with, right? Is that your model, Srini?
Absolutely.
Right, so the efficient model. Why? Again, clone it from UCLA. Why reinvent it? So the idea is not to try to brainwash people or put ideologies into them or anything. What I have noticed is that the Dakshina scholars we have are deeply interested in giving back. Not because we tell them to give back, or even if we've had any conversations, but they when they're in college, they give back heavily with time. And they are helping other Dakshina students. I mean, now what happens is some Dakshina scholars get admitted to IIT Kharagpur. 20 alums from Kharagpur come to receive him at the train station, which never happened, right? And that whole system got put in place because of all the volunteers at Dakshina. And they have a whole program of mentoring in all the different streams. They help them, get their way around campus, what to focus on, how to do well if there are problems. So there's now significant support systems at all the IITs and NITs for Dakshina alums, which is tremendous. So these are things that have come about because the kids are interested in giving back. So sorry to disappoint you, but we don't try to add more. They have enough to worry about just cracking the JEE, so they don't need more input from us. Other questions?
Sir, so once we have identified a bubble, how do we go about predicting when exactly the bubble is going to get burst? And as a pure value investor, should I be concerned about betting against Tesla's bursting, or should I be concerned more about investing in General Motors?
Well, that's a good question. So the good news is that there is the too hard part. So when one time I visited Omaha and Warren gave me a tour of his office, and I saw that on his desk there's a box which is labeled too hard, right? So I told Warren that the box is empty. I said there's nothing in the box. How can you have a? He said, oh, we'll take care of that right now. And he put a whole bunch of stuff in the box. So the thing is that the 99% of things that are happening in terms of assets and whatever's going on ought to go into a too hard pile. So the good news is we can become extremely wealthy without ever predicting when a bubble is going to burst. If you just have enough knowledge to know that something may be a bubble, not even is a bubble. Like, I don't know if Amazon is or is not a bubble, right? But the good news is we don't need to answer that question. It's irrelevant. So the key thing is you don't need to try to forecast when a bubble is going to start or when it's going to end or any of those things. You can sidestep most of it because what ought to happen in investing, value investing is it is hard enough when you focus on the no-brainers. Okay, so I always try to, at the end of the day before I finally make an investment, I always try to ask myself, is this a no-brainer? Okay, and then of course we invest, it's a no-brainer, and even then we get a handed things. Okay, so when there's already so much trouble with no-brainers, why go into an area which is slightly off from being a no-brainer? So, and the other thing to answer your question a little differently is Charlie Munger talks about a friend of his, John Arriaga. John Arriaga is on the Forbes 400 as a billionaire. And the only thing he has ever invested in his entire career is real estate within 2 miles of the Stanford campus. He has not invested in anything else ever, right? And so what is John Arriaga's circle of competence? It's like this small, right? It's not even real estate. It's not even real estate in California. It's not even real estate in Northern California. It's not even real estate in Bay Area. Okay, it is very, very specific to a particular area. And so the importance is not the size of the circle. The importance is knowing the boundaries, right? So knowing the boundaries is very critical. And Charlie Munger also says that if you just owned, if you live in a small town, you just own the best apartment building in town, the best office building in town, the McDonald's franchise, and the Ford dealership, you don't need anything. So in effect, 4 stocks, and then you just sit on your ass for your whole life, and lo and behold, one day you'll be wealthy. And the thing is that what people forget is that compounding is it's an incredibly amazing concept. My daughter is at NYU, and she was just coming home for the holiday. So I went to LAX to pick her up, about a 50-mile drive. So when I was coming back home with her, I knew this would get her attention because she was a little sleepy and all that. But I said, I just want to say that she had worked in the summer and she had made $4,800. So let's say $5,000. And in the US, we have these individual retirement accounts where you can put the money in and it's not taxed. So whatever you invest in is all tax-free, as long as it stays in the account. And so I told her I had opened for her something known as a Roth IRA, which she had signed all these papers. She had no idea what she was signing. But anyway, so she has this Roth IRA account, which is, the Roth IRA is one where it's after-tax money that goes in, but never gets taxed. When you pull it out, you never get taxed, right? So I told her that the $4,800 went into this Roth IRA, and I asked her, I said that, let's say it's $5,000. And I said, you're 18 years old right now. Let's say you don't touch this $5,000 till you're 78 years old, right? So 60 years. Let's say this money sits for 60 years. And I said, let's say it grows at 15% a year, right? So I said, what would it become when you're 78 years old? So I helped her out a little bit because she was sleepy. I said, no, in 5 years it will double. So 5,000 will become 10,000. Then next 5 years again it will double. And 60 years is how much? Can you raise your hand?
It's 4,000 times. So
Very
4,000
good.
into...
So 4,000 times 5,000 is how much?
Around 20 million.
So I told her, you'll have $20 million. And that's when she said, what? She woke up, okay? Wide awake, okay? So I said, yeah, when you're 78 years old, you have 20 million. And that's assuming that from 19 till 78, you never saved a dime. Okay? Never put any more money in. Just one summer, when you were not even in college, before you went to college, you put the money in. And so then I tried to play some mind games with her, right? So I said, so let's say after college you're making 80,000. And let's say you put away, 15%. And let's say after 5 years you're making 150,000. So I asked her, she said, I can't, it's too big. The numbers are too big, right? So the thing is that is the magic of compounding, right? So the thing is, what does Warren Buffett want more than anything else? Anyone want to answer that? If you ask Warren Buffett, the genie comes to you, genie, Warren, you can have anything you want. What do you think he's going to ask the genie? Exactly. It's like, when people ask him, what do you want people to say at your funeral? He said, just have them say, man, he was old. So the thing is, Warren understood a long time back, you need a long runway. You need a really long runway. And the second thing what I try to impress on my daughter is that if that 5,000 didn't go on at the age of 18, if it went to the age of 38, we just, it's ho-hum. right? I mean, so you need the long runway. And the second is you don't need heroics. You know, we don't need to kind of find the next Amazon or find the next Google or find the next desktop or whatever else. You don't need heroics. What you need to do is make sure, follow the 2 rules. And you guys know the 2 rules? And second rule? There you go. That's it. So you just need to know those 2 rules. And you know, she doesn't need to compound at 15%. What is it at 10%, Srini? Every 7 years?
Yeah, so Yale, in 1986 had less than 2 billion. Today they have over 20 plus billion. They just doubled every 7 years. And that's all we try to do. We try to double every 7 years. Around 10%.
And Srini, how many decades are you going to give UCLA? How many doubles are you going to give UCLA?
Hopefully 3 to 4 doubles.
Okay. So the key in life is how many doubles. That's the most important. How many doubles. And quite frankly, it doesn't matter. And you know, Sanjay makes you read all the Buffett letters, right? You make them read all of them, right? So you see in the early Buffett letters, he talks about the sale of Manhattan, right? You remember that? Have you guys forgotten? Who remembers the sale of Manhattan? No one remembers something. Put it on the test. Put it on the test, then they'll remember. And what was the other long one he talks about? The Spain's conquests. And what is the other long one?
He talks about, we've done that in the class. You guys have forgotten that if you had the same skill, if you could double your money every year through market timing or through one-time stock, you bought something and it doubled every year for 30 years. And if you bought something, you sold something, and you paid a tax on that, and you reinvested that and doubled it again, the next year, instead of 30 years, you would end up with very different outcomes.
That's right. But you know, he talked about the purchase of Manhattan from the Indians for $20. How that was a bad deal, because you know, you would have done better with a small compounding engine on that. And also how Spain, what it spent on the conquest of all these major territories, actually was a bad deal when you looked at what that money would be worth today. So it's really truly what Einstein says. It's the eighth wonder is it's keeping in focus the long term, the very long term, and not trying to get into heroics, and remembering Arrieta. You know, you don't need to know a whole lot about many things. It's better to be an inch wide and a mile deep than a mile wide and an inch deep. And that's it. Other questions? And Srini, you want to come up?
As you had the question on Tesla. I think shorting is bad karma. Right? Shorting is very you are betting somebody to fail. Right? You should own GM. Right? I mean, if GM is going to do reasonably well, why would you waste your energy in shorting something? Right? It's very hard.
You know,
short sellers.
Srini and I have a common friend, Tom Gay.
Yes.
Right? And so Srini used to be your neighbor.
Yeah.
How far do you live from Tom Gaynor?
A mile.
Okay, so they used to live close by. And Tom Gaynor, runs the investment arm of Markel. And recently, actually, he made some comments in Grant's Interest Rate Observer. And he was saying, and he was talking about the Nifty 50. How I said the bubble burst now. He said, let's say you had $50 in 1972, and you put it in the S&P 500. Okay, that $50 today is about $2,800. That's how much it's grown. Okay, now he says, now let's say you took $1 of each of those 50, and you put it into the Nifty 50 at the peak, right? So you're not $1. And then he says, now let's say you assume that 47 out of $50 went to zero. 47 companies disappeared, which didn't happen to the Nifty 50, but then 3 companies where you put $3, the value today is above 28. And of course, I have a little bit of a issue with that with Tom. I'll talk to him about it when I see him next. is one of those three companies that he assumed is part of the Nifty 50 is Walmart, which is a little controversial whether it is or is not. If you take Walmart out, it doesn't quite get there, but if you take it in, then it definitely gets there. The second thing he said is that, we all hear about Buffett's big bet on American Express in the 60s, right, where he put 40% of the assets into Amex when it dropped a lot and fell all the But Tom K says, let's say you were the schmuck who bought Amex one day before the Saddle oil crisis at the peak. So you bought, for example, at $100, and Buffett bought, let's say, at $60, for example. And both you and Warren held a position throughout, from then till today. There would be basically no difference in those two numbers on an annualized basis when you look at it. So even though the entry price was very different, so what does that tell you? What that tells you is that compounding machines, great, consistent, long-term compounding machines, is where the game is at. And that's why someone like Charlie Munger is willing to pay up for a Costco for these great compounding machines. So the key is that's where I think the rather than focus on cheap assets, what you're better off doing is focusing on assets which are durable. And that's where the game becomes complicated. Is can you identify durable franchises? Now, you can be like Warren and identify durable franchises and then keep them. Now, Warren also will tell you he was not smart enough to hang on to assets. And he was not smart enough to hang on to Disney. He bought Disney in the 60s as well. So, inactivity is a great skill for an investor. Spend your time talking to students if you're trading, which is very good for you. And patience is an amazing skill for investors. So inactivity and patience are the essence, the core of everything.
What's your view on micro-cap investing? I know the names that you usually invest in are not terribly big, like we have all these guys that are pretty big, but if you really wanted a lot of, sort of a multi-bagger, then you would probably want to enter into a company which is fairly small with a huge runway in front. Does that sort of imply that, micro-cap?
Well, I don't think it's so much micro-cap. I think the thing is that if you can identify long runways, one of the difficulties is that capitalism is brutal, creative destruction, right? So if you have a moat, everyone is hell-bent on destroying it. Right? So, and the nature of capitalism is that moats are going to get destroyed. The number of enduring moats are very rare and infrequent. I mean, they just don't. So, the difficulty is in the identification of long-term moats. So, if you have identified something that is a great moat for a long period, sure, and the good news is you don't need to put all eggs on one basket. You can make like the Nifty 50 case, you could put 10% into that one and you still have the other 90% that you can do other stuff with. But I think that the key is, so in fact, through most of our Pabrai Fund's history, we have not invested in very large companies. We ended up recently there, but we end up there just because that's where we find the opportunity. I'm never specifically looking for certain market cap ranges. Now, one of the advantages a small investor has, which is a disadvantage for me and Srini, is we can't make $1 million loans. You just can't dish out capital at that rate. It just wouldn't work for us. So I have to have businesses that at least a certain size to invest in them. So the small investor, this is an industry where the small investor has a huge advantage over the institutions. Because a small investor can make, an individual can make $100,000 bet, 1 lakh rupee bet, and that can be significant for them. And so the universe of opportunities that opens up is much wider. But that's sometimes that can be a problem because you have too many things to look at. So you need to hone in and take it from there.
You know, in the US there is a saying that the best large cap investor is a mid cap stock investor. Ideally, you want to buy mid cap companies and then let them become large cap. So that's when you make the most money. But you know, your micro cap story. So Mohnish mentioned earlier that in the 20s there are 3,300 car companies. Buffett talked about. Only 3 survived. Right? How do you know which 3 would have survived in 19?
That would have been the follow-up question.
Yes. So you know, it's a very hard trade to bet on micro cap stocks. And if you're a value investor, you know, it's hard for you to understand what the value is in a company that is 2 years old. You need a lot more information because of the car example. In the retail space today in the US or here in India, you don't know whether it's going to be Flipkart that survives or somebody. It is Amazon ate everybody up in the US. Right? So Amazon survived. We still don't know who's going to be the survivor, Ola or Uber or I don't even know the other names. So somebody will survive, but how are you going to bet? So it's much harder to bet on these micro cap names than identifying very good businesses in the 10 to $50 billion and hope that they become $100 billion.
Professor Bakshi does, you invested in, I don't know, that is a name to take in this discussion, but a company which has a long history, but it's not, big in size.
You can share the name. We're looking for stock tips.
Knowledge, so Relaxo is the name. I mean, it's a company which
After 4 or 5 years, I might actually be smart enough to buy the stock. How's Relaxo doing?
It's doing pretty well actually. So
okay.
within our market cap, close to
It's gone from
5,000.
100 billion to $1 billion in about 4 years.
Okay.
But it was a no name then. It was not that you didn't know about that name. So my point was, you have companies where you can see the history, but they're not scaled up on the size, and for some reason, if you have the special insight, you can sense that this is the kind of time when the transition is taking place.
Sure. Yeah. There are always stories, but for every good story, there are 100 disasters. and you will never have a one stock portfolio. And so if you had a 25 micro cap stock portfolio, then I would like to see the success and the failure. Then you can get better. It's very hard for me. It's not impossible. It's just very hard.
Just one question for you. Can keep sitting. I'm not a micro guy, but recently I've heard Buffett talk about rates staying low. If rates stay low forever, then this makes sense. And that chart was fascinating with rates being that low. Does it affect how each of you think you have to take a call where rates will be 10 years from now? And I know rates are derived to other things, but for the first time, do we need to worry that in India, for example, rates are sort of pegged to the world? The rates can be at 4%, and for the US can be at 1% forever. And how does one think of PEs and asset valuations in that context?
When you start your investment career, you rarely spend time on the macro aspects. So when I was a bond manager, the 10-year used to be at 6.5, and today is 1 something. And so this is around 20 years ago. At that time, I thought 6.5 was too low. And so now, fast forward 20 years. And I think Mohnish and I, when we were coming down the elevator this morning after breakfast, I think we had this very brief exchange. The way US is today, we cannot conceive of rates much higher than okay. We are in a low rate environment for a long time. And if you just use back of the envelope calculations on why macro is important to this extent. Right? We know what our total debt is. We know the tenor of the total debt. Most of the US borrowing is short term for financing their federal debts. Even though the long rates are low, you would think common sense would dictate that they borrow long term or than short term. But that's not how it has been. So we know what happens to the cost of managing the debt, today's debt, and what we think is going to be the debt in the near future. It will be prohibitively expensive from the cost of carrying the debt perspective. And we know that the growth is not materialized. That there's one thing that we do very well in the US, and that is to keep data of every type, every kind. And so we know that the other issue we spoke at, in the US we have very serious situation of underemployment and no wage inflation. We know that. And the median per capita household income has been around $50,000 now for a long time. Rest of the world, China and India, are having explosive wage inflation issues, at least in the educated sector. But in the US, median household has been quite low. And with the oil price where it is today, that is a tax break to most American households. So if you put all these things together, it's hard to see rates going up. Because as I said earlier, we don't have a problem of CPI anymore. We don't have a problem. If you adjust for inflation and look at the famous McDonald's burger index, right? The McDonald's burger probably cost the same 30 years ago if you adjust for inflation. US has abundance of food. Food is not our problem. And the question is what happens with innovation, the types of jobs we create, underemployment. Right? Today we were at Pabrai, and all these young people, they are unbelievably smart. You can see the energy, the hunger, the hustle in the faces of these people. Right? And so, but you can also see they are underemployed. They could probably be doing 100, smarter, innovative things if you give them the opportunity. But you can see the same thing in the US. Like most of the young people that come to our office are a million times smarter than I am. But they all can't do, there's only one CIO role. Right? And it is a pyramid structure everywhere. And so the underemployment is a big issue. And so with the number of young people in the ecosystem growing dramatically, with the creation of middle class and all very bright people like you, our challenge is to keep you to the fullest extent employed, because that's what the society is. But there are only so many. So anyway, the long story short, we don't see interest rates going up. You want to take the stock question before I jump in?
The stock.
How do you value stock, the cost of capital, right?
Yeah, so I think I've always taken an approach to use a 10% discount rate, and which sounds kind of stupid in this environment, but hopefully keep me out of trouble, which is probably why I can't find anything to buy. I probably take an approach where I don't want to spend too much time on macro. I think we're better off understanding businesses better and where those businesses are headed in a wide range of outcomes, if you will. And I think that's maybe more robust. Take the John Noriega approach, understand the confidence and focus on those things. And get some diversification so that you're not all eggs in one basket. So that's the best. But I think what Warren said, which I would say sounds reasonable, is that if interest rates stay low for a long time, the chart you put up, one of the things about the chart is, for most of the history of the US, interest rates have been very low. With the 6.5 election and the higher end. So there's a good chance interest rates will stay low for a long time. And what Warren says is that if interest rates stay low, then stocks would, in hindsight, turn out to be undervalued. So that's good. We might get some tailwind, but we're not banking on it. We are past your time.
Yeah, they are welcome to stay back in case, but we have to let them go. They have other classes and they have lunch to have. One more formal question.
My question is you mentioned Yale having doubled the money every 10 years. Every students of Yale have been popular by saying that
Every 7 years.
7 years, sorry. Every 7 years.
It makes a big difference.
David Sachs has said that only personal returns are decided by asset allocation, not stock selection. What is your view on that? How do you differentiate it at all?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. So, there is some truth to that. So, we study this carefully because this is how we learn the impact of our decision making. So, before I answer that, just to give you a sense, the S&P 500, Mohnish knows that index very well these days because he's working on it, has annualized at over 10% for the last 75 years. Right? So I think it goes to the other question that you asked. So 90% of returns that people generate is actually beta. Right? And if market is giving you 10, and if we can add even 1 or 2%, that is humongously impactful over a 30-year period. A 2% differential can translate into billions if you are dealing with billion-dollar portfolios. So the markets have been very cooperative and very rewarding over the last 50 to 75 years. But in spite of 2008, my portfolio generated over 10%. So we doubled in 7 years in spite of 2008. Right? Since 2005 to 2012, at the place I was. So in our case, so the saying is that it's very important to be in the right place, even if it is with an average manager. If you have to be in the last 7 years, S&P doubled, analyzed at 20%, as I said. Right? We bottomed at around 700 and we are around 2100. Right? So whether you were with the top decile manager or an average manager was not an issue. But the fact that you had to be in the US was more important. Right? And so you can take that to, so in the last 3 years, for example, we thought that Europe was coming to an end. World was coming to an end because of Greece and Italy and Spain and the Eurozone and what was happening in Belgium, the Brussels, the European Economic Union, but Europe did fabulously. So we are learning that asset allocation is as important as stock selection. And so if you want to be in the value stocks, first you have to be in the value stocks. And so the decision to be in the value stock is as important as which value stock. So that is what the difference between us are. That's how we see it.
I have a question on position sizing. Let's say you have figured out a great business and it's not a good margin of safety. So where do you draw the line as to how much you buy, provided there are no constraints in terms of liquidity of the stock?
Yeah, so so this is what usually I start my lecture with an asset allocation framework. Right? There are only 3 things that we do. What Mohnish does, we do 3 things. We come up with the strategy, right? Or we come up, as he says, cloning. He will study what others are doing, and then he figures out, okay, this is where I want to be. Right? So in our case, we have a global playground. We can invest anywhere, any asset, anybody, any asset. We have no constraints. And so we have to come up with some starting point. Okay, where are you going to invest? Right? And strategy. Is it US or India or China? And the second question we answer is how much? Right? Let's say I have analysts coming to my office all the time and say, I love this idea. Then I said, okay, how much do you want to put? Nobody has an answer because it's very hard. It's not easy. Right? And so when you have, the third one is which stock. Right? If you get the market right and if you know which stock you want to invest in, then the third is, okay, how much? It's profoundly difficult. It is the hardest thing we do. So right now, for example, this is a real example. We know that the US debt market is dislocated. Right? My team has prices on every bond that we would potentially invest in and how it is correcting. Right? We have been studying this for the last 2 years because we anticipated that high market in the US is a bubble. So we know the space we want to be. We know the names that we want to. But there are technical issues even in the US about liquidity, the size of the issue, how much you want. Like, those are different questions. But it's very hard. How much are you going to bet? We manage a couple of billion, right? Do I put 10% of the portfolio? 20%? Why? So it's a very difficult question. So that's why it's very impressive to see what people like David Einhorn or Mohnish or who can put 35% of the name in one, in one name, 35% of their assets. Very difficult to do. You have to have conviction levels that are unbelievably high.
But that can be a bubble in your own mind.
Yes.
So how do you draw that line? I mean,
So what we do is, because we manage, we are so focused on not losing capital. Because we are a living being, endowments are a living being, because there are real people who depend on payouts every month for research, for salaries, for programs. So we don't have the liberty of having a 30% drawdown. So I tell my team that let's get 20 great ideas and put 5% in each idea. It's not rocket science. But that what we are also then saying is we could lose 2 or 3 ideas to 0 and it's not going to kill us. But if I put 3 ideas of 33%, if one idea goes down, then the institution is being in trouble. From many perspectives, we have constituents, we have boards, we have alumni, and so if I lose 33% of my money, I'll be on Wall Street Journal page 1. Right? That's really lost 33%. Right? And there's a cost to it, not just losing the endowment, but we are telegraphing to the market many more things than just the loss of our money in one stock. So there are various other issues, but 3 to 5% is, you have to believe that if you are a global manager, that you can find 2-3 great ideas in the US, 2-3 great in Asia, 2-3 great in Europe, and between equity and debt or some other, we can find 20 ideas to populate at 3 to 5%. So that's how we position size our investments.
The only thing I'd add is that at least Pabrai funds will never put 35% into anything. We max out at 10%. When they go up in price, that's a good thing.
Yeah, at cost.
At cost.
His limit is at cost.
At cost, that's right.
Which is a great thing. If it becomes a third, then
yeah. So I think with that, Sanjay.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point that you made. Isn't that functionally equivalent to recreating a position at that price?
Well, I think the issue is that it's a valid point, but the second issue is, do you want to cut the cloud and what are the things, right? So the key, I think, when we look at the example that Tom Wiener talks about, or Amex and so on, the key is long-term. So these are positions that we have been held for a while, we know them well. We have some conviction about them. So I've never sold down a position strictly because of size and made that mistake. But I just think it would be unconscionable to take that position and cut it when we think it's to be discounted.
I agree with you. It's just a paradox.
Yeah.
Anyway, great. Thank you so much, both of you.